They sent one final distress call, then Earth's Deathworlders descended from the sky. I have lived 112 years, and I have never been afraid of the dark between stars. Space is quiet. Space is patient. It does not wish you harm. It simply exists, vast and cold and indifferent, and if you respect it, it will let you pass. It was not space that I was afraid of that day. My name is Kael'vas. I am a communications officer aboard the colony Ark Undying Breath, and on the day I am about to describe, I was sitting at my console watching the shields fail one layer at a time, like petals falling from a dying flower. The numbers on my screen told a simple story. Each number was smaller than the one before it. Each number meant fewer people standing between 40,000 sleeping souls and open vacuum. The Kreth Dominion had found us 4 hours into our transit corridor. I want you to understand who the Kreth are, because the story does not make sense without that understanding. The Kreth are conquerors. That is not an insult. That is their identity, their culture, their purpose. They have built an empire across 11 star systems by taking what they want from those who cannot stop them. They do not hate the species they destroy. They do not feel contempt. They simply look at a ship full of colonists the way a farmer looks at a field, as a resource, to be harvested at the most convenient time. We were very convenient. The Undying Breath is not a warship. She was never meant to be. She is wide and slow and full of cryo chambers, holding 40,000 Velhari men and women and children who paid everything they owned to start a new life on a frontier world. Her weapons were designed to deflect asteroid fragments. Her hull was designed to withstand radiation and micro-impacts. She was not designed to absorb plasma cannon fire from 4 Kreth destroyers and 2 carriers arranged in a hunting formation. Our escorts had been destroyed in the first 11 minutes. I sat at my console and listened to the captain's voice behind me, steady and quiet, directing damage control teams to sections that could still be saved. Our hull had been breached in 3 places. The atmosphere was venting from Deck 7 like breath from a punctured lung. And the Kreth were not hurrying. That was perhaps the worst part. They were circling us slowly, testing our remaining shields, enjoying the process the way a cat enjoys a mouse that cannot run anymore. Captain Venalis came to stand beside me. She was old, even by Velhari standards. Her silver hair was tied back, and her hands were folded behind her, which was the way she always stood when she was thinking through something she did not want to say out loud. She said, "Open the galactic distress frequency." I looked at her. The galactic distress frequency is the last option. Every spacefaring species knows the frequency. Every species is expected, by treaty and tradition, to respond. In 140 years of its use, it had produced results perhaps 40% of the time. The rest of the time, the nearest ships were too far away, or too small, or the situation resolved itself before anyone arrived, which usually meant it resolved badly. "Captain," I said, "the nearest Galactic Council vessel is 9 hours away." "I know," she said. "Open it anyway." I opened it. I sent the standard Velhari distress packet. Our coordinates, our ship identification, our status, the nature of the threat. I sent it outward in all directions, like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples to every receiver in range. Then I watched the responses come in. The Torathi Collective acknowledged the signal and reported that their nearest vessel was 6 hours distant and could not engage Kreth forces without a formal council authorization, which would take 72 hours to process. I noted this without emotion. The Selin Union sent condolences and advised that Kreth space was outside their operational boundary. I noted this also. A Merchant Guild relay station picked up the signal and automatically flagged it for review by a committee that met on the 3rd Tuesday of each month. I was beginning to understand what our last hour would look like. Then a response came from a source I almost did not recognize. The signal identifier was rough around the edges, formatted slightly wrong, like someone had learned the Galactic Standard Communication Protocol from a textbook rather than from practice. But the message itself was clear. It said, "Hold position, we are coming." I ran the identifier through my registry. It took 4 seconds, which is unusual. My system always responds in under 1 second. The result came back. Earth, humanity. A species registered in the Galactic Catalog 61 years ago, listed as Tier 2 Deathworlders, flagged with the standard advisory notice that most registrars attach to species from high-gravity, high-hostility worlds. The advisory said, "Approach with caution, do not provoke." I stared at the identifier for a moment, then I pulled up everything the Galactic Registry had on humans, because I am a communications officer, and information is what I do when I am frightened. The file was not long. Humans had been spacefaring for less than a century. They had 4 colony worlds, a handful of station outposts, and a small military force that the Galactic Council had classified as regional in scope and limited in reach. They had made no enemies of note, been party to no major conflicts, and were generally regarded by the broader galactic community the way one regards a new neighbor who has not yet caused any trouble, with cautious patience and mild curiosity. The Kreth Dominion battle group that surrounded us consisted of 4 destroyers, 2 carriers, and a command ship, 11,000 armed crew, weapon systems that had broken the defenses of 14 separate civilizations. The humans said they were coming. I did not know what to feel. I knew what to think, which was that this would likely not change our situation in any practical sense, but something in the way the message was written, short, clean, without ceremony or hesitation, stayed in my mind while I went back to managing the damage reports. 23 minutes later, a second human transmission arrived. The voice was female, low, and carried the particular quality of someone who is very focused and not at all frightened. She said, "Theta Company, 679 Airborne, ETA 11 minutes. Keep your emergency beacons active." 11 minutes. I remember thinking, 11 minutes is a very specific number. Estimates are usually rounded. People who give specific numbers either know exactly where they are, or they want you to believe they do. I decided both might be true. The Kreth commander hailed us at the 9-minute mark. His voice was smooth and almost polite, the way powerful things can afford to be polite. He told us that no species in this sector would risk a conflict with the Dominion over a single colony ship. He told us we had made a dignified effort and that our passengers would be processed humanely according to Dominion resource protocols, which I knew meant something I will not describe here. He told us to stand down and prepare to receive boarding teams. I did not respond. I kept the beacon active. I watched the clock. 11 minutes. Then the sensors screamed. 3 human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel inside the engagement zone, not at the safe standard distance. Not at the edge of the system where responsible commanders stage their forces before assessing a situation. They dropped in close, between the Kreth formation and the undying breath, inside weapons range of everyone, in the exact worst possible place to arrive if you were concerned about your own safety. I later learned that this was called a combat insertion. I later learned that most species considered it insane. I later learned that the humans practiced it regularly. The 3 ships were not large by any standard I knew. One heavy cruiser, hull designation EFCS Relentless, showing clear signs of previous heavy repairs. Sections of her hull plating were different colors where they had been replaced, and her engine configuration had been modified at least twice from the original design. 2 fast-attack corvettes flanked her, nimble and lean, built more for speed than protection. They did not send a hail. They did not announce themselves. They did not recite the traditional declaration of engagement that every spacefaring civilization had agreed to use at the opening of any military confrontation, a tradition 400 years old and universally observed. They fired. 4 seconds after arrival, full weapons discharge, targeted at the engine sections of the 2 nearest Kreth destroyers. The strikes were precise. Both destroyers lost primary propulsion in under a minute. The Kreth formation broke apart, ships scrambling to turn and respond to a threat that had appeared where threats were not supposed to appear. I found that I had stopped breathing. I made myself start again. The battle that followed was not like anything in my 300 years of recorded study. I have read about a great many conflicts. I have seen reconstructions, analyzed tactics, studied the logic of fleet engagements across a dozen different civilizations. What I watched on my sensor screen that day followed a different kind of logic entirely. The Relentless took a direct hit from a Kreth plasma cannon that would have disabled most ships I knew. Her shields collapsed on the port side. Fire suppression systems activated across 2 decks, and she turned into the next shot and kept firing, as if the damage was a minor inconvenience to be dealt with later. I opened the human communication channel and found, to my surprise, that it was unencrypted, open to anyone. The humans were not concerned about who heard them. The voices on the channel were calm. Occasionally they spoke quickly, exchanging information, adjusting to the situation. One officer read out shield percentages and damage reports in the flat tone of someone reciting a grocery list. At one point I heard someone in the background, clearly not at a command station, singing. A low, rhythmic song with words I could not translate. He was still singing when his section reported a secondary hull breach. The Kreth commander finally broke and hailed the human ships directly. He demanded formal identification. He cited the galactic conventions of engagement. He used the language of procedure and protocol, which is the language powerful civilizations use when they want to slow things down and regain control. A human voice responded. She identified herself as Colonel Adaeze Okonkwo of Theta Company. Her voice was the same voice from the earlier transmission, low, focused and carrying no emotion I could identify as fear. She said, "You attacked a civilian vessel. There are no conventions here." The Kreth commander said something about proportional response and the recognized laws of interstellar conflict. I could hear in his voice that he was recalibrating. He had expected the humans to be slowed by the formalities. He had expected hesitation. Species always hesitated when you spoke the language of rules and process, because most species had built their civilization around the idea that rules and process made the universe manageable. The humans did not seem to share that idea. One of the corvettes, her engines failing from a sustained hit, used her last available thrust to align with a Kreth destroyer's primary weapons array. I watched this on the sensors and understood what was about to happen before it did. The crew of that corvette had already evacuated. I could see the emergency suit transponders drifting away from the hull, a small cluster of lights floating in the dark, waiting for retrieval. The corvette struck the weapons array at full available speed. The crew was recovered 18 minutes later, all alive, by a shuttle from the Relentless. I heard one of them laughing when they were pulled inside. I did not understand this. I have thought about it many times since, and I think I understand it a little better now, but not completely. I am not sure complete understanding is possible from the outside. The Kreth formation collapsed over the next 40 minutes. 2 destroyers were disabled. 1 carrier retreated. The second carrier attempted to establish a defensive position and was flanked by the remaining human corvette in a maneuver that should not have worked given the mass difference between the 2 ships, and yet it worked, because the human pilot flew as if the laws of safe navigation were suggestions rather than requirements. The Kreth command ship turned and ran. The Relentless went after it. I watched the pursuit on the long-range sensors, a slow chase across the outer system, until the command ship stopped accelerating and went to minimal power, which is the universal signal for surrender. Colonel Okonkwo's voice came over the channel one final time, directed at the Kreth ship. She said, "You will want to remember this system. Do not come back. Nothing else. No terms, no demands, no formal declaration of victory as the conventions required. Just that. A statement of fact, delivered in the tone of someone explaining something simple to someone who should have already understood it." Then the channel shifted, and she was speaking to us. She asked how many were hurt. I told her, 47 dead, many more injured. 3 hull sections open to space, now sealed by emergency foam. Cryosystems for 11,000 passengers running on backup power. There was a pause of exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "We are coming alongside. Open your port docking collar." They came aboard 40 minutes later. I went to the airlock personally. I am not sure why. I told myself it was my duty as communications officer to greet them and establish a working relationship for the repair coordination. I think the truth is that I wanted to see them. After everything I had just watched on the sensors, I needed to see what these people actually were. The airlock opened. They were tired. That was the first thing I noticed. Tired in the way people are tired when they have been operating at high intensity for a long time, and are continuing to operate anyway. Some had field dressings on cuts and burns. One man walked with a noticeable difficulty that he was clearly pretending was not there. They carried equipment, medical kits, repair tools, portable atmosphere processors, and they were already sorting it as they came through, hands moving, voices low, establishing who was going where without waiting for direction. Colonel Okonkwo was not what I had imagined. She was shorter than me, which surprised me, because Velhari are not a tall species. She had dark skin and close-cut gray hair, and eyes that were taking in everything around her simultaneously, in the way of someone who has spent a long time in situations where missing one detail could be costly. Her right forearm had a field dressing wrapped around it. She was issuing orders into a small handheld communication device with her left hand. She looked up at me. She said, "You held together well. How many hurt?" I told her again. The numbers. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds, the same pause I had heard over the channel. Then she opened them and said, "Show me your medical bay first." We worked together for 6 hours. I have done many things in my career that required focus and discipline. I have managed communication arrays during ion storms. I have coordinated evacuation procedures on damaged stations. I thought I understood what it was to work under pressure. Working alongside those humans for 6 hours changed what I knew about that. They grieved. That was something I had not expected. When they found our 47 dead, laid in the corridor outside the medical bay, they stopped. Each of them stopped for a moment, not long, but real. One of the younger soldiers pressed her hand against the shoulder of the nearest body and said something quietly in a language I did not know. Then they moved on, and they kept working, and the grief did not slow them. It ran alongside them instead, like a second river in the same channel, and they carried it without putting it down. They made each other laugh in the middle of catastrophic things. Not cruel laughter, Not the laughter of people who did not care. The laughter of people who had found that some situations are so far outside the boundaries of normal experience that the only honest response left is to find the absurd thing inside the terrible thing and acknowledge it out loud. I did not understand this either, but I watched it work. I watched a man whose hands were shaking from cold and effort take a breath and make a small joke about the ship's emergency lighting, and the shaking slowed, and he kept working. Toward the end, one of their medics sat down beside me in the corridor. He was young, with the particular exhaustion of someone who has gone far past what they thought their limit was and discovered the limit was elsewhere. He had been working on our injured for 4 hours straight. He asked me why we had not called for help sooner. I told him the truth. I said, "We did not believe anyone would come." He looked at me, not with confusion exactly, more with the expression of someone who has just heard something that does not fit the shape of the world they live in. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Well, now you know." He stood up, rolled his shoulders once, and went back to work. I have thought about those 4 words many times since. They were the simplest thing anyone said to me that day. They were also the most important. The undying breath reached her destination 7 weeks later, carrying 40,000 people who were still alive, because 3 small ships full of tired humans had come when we called. The colony was planted. The children who had slept in cryochambers while the battle raged above them grew up under a new sky and never knew how close the darkness had come. I filed my full report with the Galactic Council. I recommended a formal review of humanity's classification in the registry, not their threat level, but their entry under the section that catalogs a species-defining characteristics. The current entry lists biology and technology and resource status. It does not mention the thing I saw on my sensors the moment they arrived, the way they flew directly into the worst possible place without slowing, without hesitating, without sending a committee to review the options. It does not mention the singing. It does not mention that they came because someone called, and that was reason enough. I have lived 112 years, and in that time I have read 1,000 entries in the Galactic Registry, and I have learned that registries are very good at measuring things that can be measured. Size, speed, weapons capacity, years of spaceflight. They are very poor at measuring the thing that actually matters. I do not have a word for it in my language. I have looked, and the word is not there. But I think the humans have it. I think it is the thing that gets a ship's crew singing when the hull is breached, and laughing when the engines fail, and pressing a hand to the shoulder of someone they never met, and then standing up and going back to work. Whatever it is, I know this much. The Kreth Dominion has conquered 47 species. They have never met anything like it before, and neither had I.